My family started dividing my father's house before his body was even taken from the hospital. But the letter he left for me made every one of them go silent. I was the youngest son, not the favorite, not the smart one, not the loud one. Just the quiet one who stayed in the background while everyone else had opinions about my life. My older brother Daniel was the successful one. He wore expensive watches, spoke like every room belonged to him, and treated our family dinners like business meetings. My sister Claire was the responsible one. At least that was what everyone called her. She had a way of speaking softly while making you feel small. And then there was me, Evan, 32 years old, unmarried, working at my father's old hardware store, and still living 10 minutes away from the house I grew up in. To my family, that meant I had failed. To my father, I was never sure what it meant. He was not an easy man to understand. He did not say much. He did not hug. He did not sit you down and talk, not hug. He did not sit you down and talk about feelings. When I was younger, I thought his silence meant disappointment. When I got older, I stopped asking. After my mother died, my father got quieter. Daniel visited on holidays and talked about money. Claire came when she needed something signed, moved, fixed, or stored in the garage. I came every day, not because anyone asked, because someone had to. I brought groceries, I checked his pills, I fixed the loose railing on the porch, I cleaned the gutters, I drove him to appointments. I sat in the kitchen while he ate soup and pretended not to notice his hands shaking. But at every family gathering, I was still treated like the son who had no direction. Daniel would say things like, "Still working at Dad's store?" Claire would laugh and say, "At least someone is keeping him company." And my father would sit there, silent. That silence hurt more than their words, because a small part of me always waited for him to say, "He does more than you know." But he never did. The first sign that something was changing came in November. My father asked me to drive him to the bank. That was not strange by itself. He hated online banking and still kept paper folders for everything. But that day, when we pulled into the parking lot, he did not get out right away. He just sat there with both hands on his cane, looking through the windshield. Then he said, "Evan, some people only respect what they can take." I looked at him, waiting for more. He said nothing else. Inside the bank, he asked me to wait in the lobby. He came out almost 40 minutes later, holding a plain brown envelope. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "It will be." That was all. 2 weeks later, Daniel showed up at the house without calling first. That almost never happened. I was in the kitchen fixing the cabinet under the sink when I heard his voice in the hallway. "Dad, you need to think clearly. The house is too much for you. Sell it while the market is good." My father said, "No." Daniel's voice dropped. "You can't leave things messy. Claire and I have families, responsibilities." I stayed still under the sink, holding the wrench. Then Daniel said the words I never forgot. "And Evan can't manage anything serious. You know that." There was a long silence. I waited for my father to defend me. He didn't. I heard Daniel leave 10 minutes later. When I came out from under the sink, my father was at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain like he was studying a map. I wanted to ask him why he let Daniel say that. Instead, I just washed my hands. But something about that night stayed with me. Because when I turned to leave, my father said, "You hear more than people think." I stopped. He did not look up. Then he added, "So do I." That was the first time I wondered if his silence was not what I thought it was. After that, Claire started coming around more. She brought folders. She brought tea. She used that careful voice she used when she wanted something. She would sit beside him in the living room and say things like, "Dad, we just want things handled properly." But when I walked in, the conversation always stopped. One afternoon, I found Claire standing in his bedroom with the top drawer of his dresser open. She jumped when she saw me. Then she smiled. "I was looking for his insurance card," she said. It was a strange answer because his insurance card was in his wallet, and she knew that. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'll help you look." Her smile disappeared. That night, I checked the drawer after she left. Nothing seemed missing. But there was a small square of dust on the inside bottom, like something had been moved. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself grief makes people weird even before the loss comes. But then I noticed the filing cabinet in the garage had been opened. My father kept every paper in that cabinet: warranties, store records, tax forms, old receipts, house repairs, even birthday cards from 20 years ago. The lock was scratched. When I asked him about it, he looked at the cabinet, then at me. "Did you open it?" he asked. "No." His jaw tightened. Then he said, "Good." Not angry, not surprised, just tired. That was when suspicion began to grow in me like a weight. I started paying attention. Daniel called more often, but never when I was there. Claire asked strange questions about the house title. They both suddenly cared about my father's health, but only in ways that sounded connected to property, accounts, and papers. And through all of it, my father kept pulling me aside for small things. He asked me where I kept my spare keys. He asked if my phone was locked. He asked if anyone else had access to my email. One evening, while I was helping him into his chair, he gripped my wrist. His hand was thin, but the grip was strong. "If something happens," he said, "don't let them rush you." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the hallway, even though nobody else was there. Then he said, "They will try." I barely slept that night. A week later, he collapsed at home. I found him on the kitchen floor at 6:20 in the morning, his hand near the table leg, one slipper missing. The ambulance came fast, but everything after that felt slow. Hospital lights, white sheets, machines, doctors using careful words. Daniel arrived in a suit, angry that nobody had called him sooner, even though I called him from the ambulance. Claire cried loudly in the waiting room, then asked me where Dad kept his important documents. I stared at her. Our father was in a hospital bed, and she was asking about papers. That was the first emotional hit that cracked something in me. Not because I expected better from them, because I realized my father had expected this. He had warned me. My father died 3 days later. The house felt different after that. Not empty, heavy, like every wall remembered something I was only starting to understand. The morning after, Daniel called a family meeting at Dad's house. He did not ask me, he told me. When I arrived, Claire was already there with her husband. Daniel had brought his wife too. They were sitting at the dining table with coffee, folders, and a list. A list. Before anything had even settled. Daniel said, "We need to be practical." Claire nodded. "Dad would not want us fighting." I wanted to laugh, but nothing came out. Daniel continued. "The house should be sold. The store too. We split everything evenly. Simple." I said, "We should wait." Daniel leaned back like I had said something childish. "Wait for what?" I looked at the hallway, at the scuff marks near the door where my father's cane always hit the wall. Then I said, "For the attorney." Claire blinked. Daniel's face changed. "What attorney?" I didn't know the answer. Not until the doorbell rang. A woman in a gray coat stood on the porch holding a leather folder. She introduced herself as Ms. Harrow, my father's attorney. Daniel stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. Ms. Harrow did not react. She simply said, "Your father asked me to come here today. He wanted all three of you present." Claire's mouth opened, then closed. I felt my hands go cold. Ms. Harrow sat at the table and removed several documents. She explained that my father had updated his will 6 weeks earlier. Daniel interrupted immediately. 6 weeks? He was sick. Ms. Harrow looked at him. He was evaluated and found fully capable of making his own decisions. That shut him up for a moment. Then she pulled out a sealed envelope. It had my name written on it in my father's handwriting. Evan. Just my name. My throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Ms. Harrow said, "He asked that this be read aloud before the will." Daniel said, "That's not necessary." She looked at him again. It was his instruction. The room went silent. I opened the envelope. My hands shook so much the paper made noise. The letter started with one sentence. "If they are sitting around the table pretending this is about fairness, read slowly." Nobody moved. I kept reading. He wrote that he knew Daniel had been pressuring him to sell the house. He knew Claire had gone through his drawers. He knew both of them had discussed moving him into a facility so the house could be listed faster. Claire gasped and said, "That is not what happened," but Ms. Harrow said, "Let him finish." My father wrote that the quiet son they dismissed was the only one who came when there was nothing to gain. He wrote that I paid the store's overdue suppliers from my own savings one winter because I didn't want him embarrassed. I had never told anyone that. He wrote that I replaced the water heater, handled his medications, slept on the couch after his fall in March, and sat with him during nights when pain kept him awake. Then came the line that broke me. "I stayed silent at that table because I wanted to see who you were without being corrected." My eyes blurred. For years, I thought his silence meant he agreed with them. But he had been watching. He had been listening. He had seen all of it. Then the letter changed everything. My father left the house to me. Not to sell, not to split, to keep. He left the hardware store to me, too, including the land under it. Daniel and Claire would each receive money from separate accounts, but only the amount he had already decided years before. Then he wrote why. Daniel sees the house as value. Claire sees it as security. Evan sees it as home. Daniel's face turned red. Claire started crying, but it sounded angry. She said, "He manipulated Dad." I looked at her and felt something inside me finally stop begging to be understood. Miss Harrow placed another document on the table. It was a signed statement from my father, dated the same day as the letter. It said no one had influenced him. It said he knew exactly how this would be received. It said if either of them contested the will without valid grounds, their portion would be reduced to $1. Daniel stopped talking. Claire stopped crying. That was the main reveal. My father had not just left me a letter. He had protected me from the fight he knew was coming. The emotional reaction did not hit all at once. At first I felt numb, then embarrassed, then angry. Not loud anger, the quiet kind that sits in your chest and makes your hands shake. I thought about every dinner where they laughed at my job, every time they called me stuck, every time they acted like staying close to an aging parent was failure. And I thought about my father sitting there, letting them show themselves. After Ms. Harrow left, Daniel tried to talk to me outside. His voice was lower now, more careful. He said, "We shouldn't let paperwork destroy the family." I looked at him and said, "The paperwork didn't do that." He had no answer. Claire sent me long messages for 2 weeks. Some were angry, some were sad. Some said I should do what was fair. But I had spent years being fair to people who only noticed me when they needed something. So I stopped answering. The consequences came fast. Daniel stopped coming around completely. Claire told relatives I had taken advantage of Dad. But when people asked for details, the story fell apart. Because neighbors had seen me there every day. The store employees knew who kept the place running. The pharmacist knew who picked up every prescription. The doctor's office knew whose number was on every form. For the first time in my life, I did not defend myself. I didn't have to. I reopened the hardware store 3 weeks later. The first morning, I found my father's old jacket hanging in the back office. In the pocket was a small key. It opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a stack of receipts, notes, and a photo of us standing outside the store when I was 19. I barely remembered the day. On the back, he had written, "He thinks I don't see him." I sat in that office and cried harder than I had cried at the hospital. Not because of the house, not because of the store, because the one person I thought had never respected me had understood me better than anyone. Months passed. I fixed the porch railing again. I painted the kitchen. I kept the store open. I changed nothing important. Sometimes Daniel drives past the house but does not stop. Claire and I have spoken once since then. She asked if I hated her. I told her I didn't. But I also told her I was done shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable. She cried. I let the silence sit there. This time, silence belonged to me. My father's last letter did not make me powerful. It did not erase the years I spent feeling invisible. But it gave me something I never knew I needed. It gave me the end of a story I had been telling myself since I was a child. I was not the forgotten son. I was the son who stayed. And in the end, my father made sure everyone knew it.